welcome my friend and neighbor and former neighbor, Nell, who's been to the library many times, back and again, coming back as a speaker. And to welcome Willie Cole back to the library. We think he hasn't been here in a while. We need to check his library card. So it sounds like a good program. It's a great series. We've had a good attendance. We welcome you all and hope you enjoy the evening. Aye?
Thank you, Tom. Microphone sounds good. Everyone can hear me? Okay, great. Good evening, and thank you for coming out tonight to this, our 6th program in Newark Lifetime's Recollections and Reflections, the series, monthly series of conversations with notable Newarkers throughout the entire year to help celebrate Newark's 350th anniversary. Tonight, our guests are artists Willie Cole and Nell, two gifted, distinguished, and renowned visual artists. Born in Somerset County, Willie Cole lived in Newark for many years, starting from the age of 3. And he's a product of the Newark school system, graduating from Robert Street, Quitman Street, and Hawthorne Avenue schools, and then Arts High School. Thereafter, he studied art at Boston University, the School of Visual Arts in New York, and the Art Students League in New York. From 1980 until 1994, Willie lived and worked on Lum Lane in the Ironbound in years that he calls a life-changing experience, something we'll get into a little later. While Willie no longer lives in Newark, he is around a lot, and his mother still lives here, and I believe is with us tonight. Please welcome one of the country's foremost conceptual artists, winner of the David C. Driscoll Prize for contributions to African American art, and an artist whose work is in private collections and museums throughout the world, Willie Cole. Nell is a Cal Berkeley and Harvard-educated historian who taught at the University of North Carolina, University of Pennsylvania, and Princeton, and authored more than a half-dozen books. 10 years or so ago, she decided to pursue a lifelong passion and turn her attention to art, returning to school to take a BFA from the Mason Gross School of the Arts in New Brunswick, and then an MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. Since then, she's held several artist in residence positions, including 2 in Newark, and has also had a number of showings of her pieces, both in solo and group shows. You can currently see her work on display at WBGO. With the guidance of our dearly beloved, the late Clement Price, Nell and her husband, Glenn, who holds a position at the Rutgers Business School in Newark, moved here in 2002. They're still here, and this is where she maintains her studio. Please welcome Nell Painter. Before we begin our conversation, let me briefly say why I thought a program on art was a natural for this series. Many of us are aware that the Newark Museum has been a world-class art institution for many years, since John Cotton Dana founded it in this library and was formally established in 1909. But perhaps what's not so well known is just how many great artists have made Newark their home or worked here going back to the 18th century. That list includes Thomas Moran, America's great landscape artist, whose sketches were so instrumental in getting the area we know today as Yellowstone National Park being so designated. And also Lily Martin Spencer, one of America's great family portrait painters, who came to Newark not only to paint, but also to subsist on the fruits and vegetables that she could cultivate in her garden. And each was here for more than a few years. And then there are the likes of painters Hilda Belcher, Minna Citrone, Asher Duran, Henry Gasser, Bernard Gussow, George Guinness, Adolph Conrad, Michael Lenson, Peter Maverick, and Luigi Rist, to say nothing of Sculptor, Tony Smith, photographers, Nathaniel Dorsey, and George Tice, art restorer and gallery owner Bernard Rabin, cartoonist Walter McDougall, and Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist for the Newark Evening News, Lou Peace, along with many great architects, Frank Grad and Jeremiah O'Rourke among them. Put these people together, and many others, and I think you'll realize there can be little doubt that Newark has served as a hub of the art world for many years. Our two guests tonight are continuing that great tradition and building on a legacy for Newark that I feel we can all agree is certainly worth celebrating this year and every year. So with that, let us begin. And what I'd like to do is just to ask each of our guests to check their microphones first, make sure that everyone can hear.
Does this work for you?
Take care of that. Yes. We're just waiting for another microphone.
Tell us what happened in Art Criticism Starlight.
Art criticism at the Starlight?
Must have let critics.
Was there ever really art criticism at the Starlight? I know our art critics used to sit on the board of the Newark Museum, which I found a very kind of weird relationship, but that's the whole other issue. Okay, so we're good. Okay, I'd like to start with Willie, if I could, and have him go over his early years in Newark and his education in Newark. Maybe specifying some teachers who were important to him. He told me in our conversation last week that they didn't inspire me to become an artist as much as to make art. And perhaps he could talk about his experience at Art High School in his development as an artist.
Hello, thank you all for attending. I was at Arts High from 1968 to 1972, and the environment was kind of revolutionary. You know, a lot of things happened in those years. But even though it was an art high school, I don't feel that I got enough art history at the time. I realized later on when I got to college that I didn't know a lot of artists by name. Because I knew Salvador Dali, I knew Picasso, he doesn't count, everybody knows Picasso. But I didn't know the latest contemporary artists. But I did know graphic design because of Mr. Benevento. And I did know fashion illustration because of Miss Jean So. And I did know how to paint because of Mr. Spinner, I think his name was. Spinner. And we did have one avant-garde teacher, Miss Stiller, was her name. And we did installation in her classroom and tying yarn from wall to wall and things like that. So our side emphasized creativity, but just like today, not many schools teach the business of fine art. So I learned how to mind my subconscious in high school. I learned how to let go and believe I could be creative. But making a living was more, of course.
You told me a story the other day about if you had known that Wayne Shorter had also been a student at Arts High School, that your career might have taken a different turn. Could you relate that for our audience, please?
I know now at Arts High they have the Hall of Fame. A lot of schools have that. But when I came to RSI, I was a double major. I was a music and an art major. And I have to tell you a little personal story. Because I was a double major, I didn't have a lunch break. I took music theory during my lunch. But after my sophomore year, I met a beautiful young girl, a nice young 30-year-old girl. The only way that I could see her was during lunch. So I dropped out of the music department. But if I had known of all the great music history from Newark and people like Wayne Shorter, who I admire to this day, I would have made a different decision. Because here I am, 50-something years later, I don't know where that 13-year-old girl is today. But she changed my life in that one moment. That one pubescent moment.
Nell, you took a little different route. You told me a story about being at Cal Berkeley, I guess it was your first year, and taking a course, an art course, that didn't turn out quite the way you wanted.
It wasn't my first year there. I'm from California. I'm from Oakland. And I went to high school at Oakland Tech. And that's actually where I started. There and California, what was then called California College of Arts and Crafts. I took drawing lessons in the summer with a woman who was a distinguished printmaker, Margot Humphrey. She stuck with it, I didn't. I went on to Berkeley, the only place I ever wanted to go to college. I thought you went to Stanford because you couldn't get in Berkeley. I was an art major. I actually drew 2 covers for the Pelican, which was the humor magazine. And I actually was in a group show. But I had never done sculpture. I did drawing mostly. And I was good at drawing. I was not good at sculpture. And I got a C in sculpture, which I earned. Because I didn't do any work. I thought, well, if you have talent, you don't have to do any work. I'm sure people don't think like that anymore. So I come from an academic family. My father taught me to draw, my mother taught me to write. I knew how to write. I'm not praised for writing. I love to write just as much as I love to draw. But if you love to do 2 things and one thing gets you bennies, then that's the way I did for years.
Willie, when you were growing up in New York, you had some contact with both Amiri Baraka, and you also talked about working for the well-known jazz organist Freddie Roach. Can you talk about each of those people and how they influenced your life?
Yes. Well, Freddie Roach, just a sense of freedom. Growing up in Newark in those years, the idea of a black man making a living through his arts was not so typical. It was a light. It was like meeting somebody who had gone beyond what was expected of him. And at the time, Freddie was renovating one of these little mansions on High Street at the time, and I worked for him. Helped him do that. So the experience and inspiration from him was just the example of him doing those kind of things. Not living in an apartment, not having a 9-to-5 job. I always attribute Amiri as bringing African culture to Newark. I was born in *55, so that means that I was born colored. Then I became a Negro. Then I became an Afro-American. And when Amiri came to New York, I was suddenly black. That those changes brought certain awareness and pride that we grew through up to this day. So I was attributing that to just opening my eyes beyond the stereotypes.
And also, you mentioned that having an African-American art teacher at Quitman Street School was important to you as well, even though perhaps not in developing your art, but in just having that person as a role model.
Right, that's people who are artists here know Jan Crichton. So I had him as a little kid, and then he was also taught outside, but he wasn't my teacher outside. But you know, teaching art and making art without teaching art was something that nobody could really teach me about. I think it had to do with just desire and willingness to not take no for an answer. So I admired Janet he's also a singer, so I admired that as well.
Okay, let me ask you both the same question, and that is about your art education beyond the secondary school level. Now, when you went back to school, you told me that, and here's one of the most accomplished and educated women in her field, with a PhD from Harvard, decides that she's going to go back, she wants to pursue her lifelong passion of art, and decides that she's going to do it first by going back and getting degrees. But it wasn't easy. Could you talk a little bit about that?
People often ask me why, if I already had 3 degrees, I needed some more. And I tried first without. I tried doing art. I did it at the Newark Museum with a very sweet teacher who wanted verisimilitude. And I wasn't interested in verisimilitude. I took the drawing and painting marathon at the studio school in New York, and I discovered that I wanted more than just the studio. I wanted the art history and the theory and the criticism and all the stuff that goes with it. So then it became clear that for me, I needed records, I needed a university. So that's how I got into that. I settled that way. But also, with Delusions of Grandeur, I wanted to be a professional artist, like the historian I was. This was not realistic. But I tried.
Okay. And you said that in graduate school, when you went for your MFA, that they were pretty rough on you.
That's an understatement. So you were very kind, and you said how well educated I am, and I've done all these books, and what a leading figure I am, a public intellectual, and all that. When I was in graduate school, I was a pathetic mess. I was 2 qualities that don't go anywhere from what I could see of the art world. 1, I was old, and 2, I was academic. So they tried to beat academic out of me, and those of you who are in my generation understand what people do to old people. So it was quite a humbling experience. It took me a couple of years to get over it after that. And actually, I graduated from RISD in 2011, and I had a residency at Yale in 2012. And my friends and colleagues were wonderful to me there. But they would ask me, how did art school change the way you think about history? I couldn't answer. I said, I don't do history anymore. They said, oh, come on, that's not a good answer. And I didn't have an answer. It took me until the next year when I gave a talk at the Met, and I decided that I was going to shoehorn my own art into it, that I started making artist books. And I happened to have the last copy of the first one. Which is Hard History by Nell Painter, Volume 27. You're saying, geez, I missed Volume 20. You did. It doesn't exist. I started at 27. And in the back, there's a little book called Art History by Nell Painter, Volume 28, which I did last year. Now, next, my dear husband is sitting there, and next to it is a magnificent book by Willie. And then next to it is a cunning little flimsy book by Nell Painter, and they cost the same. There are no words.
But, something interesting you mentioned to me the other day was that in the history books that you wrote, you worked with art, and that by working with, putting those books together and working with the art that illustrated the books, that helped keep your interest and love of art alive while you were still a historian.
That's absolutely true. I started getting back into art with my biography of Sojourner Truth. It's called Sojourner Truth, The Life, the Symbol. Sojourner Truth did not read and write, but she had the photographs taken. So I went to the magnificent art history library at Princeton and educated myself in the rhetoric of the image. And I loved it. I loved dealing with images. And then I did a book called Creating Black Americans, which is a narrative history of Black Americans from 1619 to the present. And I illustrated it with all black fine art. So once again, I had to study, to teach myself African American art history. But just being immersed in all those fantastic images, that was only what black artists have produced that relates to history. So it wasn't art history. But there was enough wonderful work to really keep me going. And then finally, my most recent book, The History of White People, I finished while I was in art school. And that is a very visual book. It has a chapter on beauty as a scientific category, which I could not have seen before getting back into art in a very serious way. Let me just say one last thing about the relationship between history and art. And that is when I dealt with images with Sojourner Truth, I was using the images as a replacement for text. I was missing text. What I learned in art school and subsequently by making art is the image by itself, not as a substitute for anything else, not as a second kind of meaning, but as valuable in its own right.
Willie, Boston University, School of Visual Arts in New York, art student league. How important were they in your development as an artist?
I have to be an optimistic. So. SVA, I always enjoyed the studio experience, seeing like everybody in the room working together. That was important for me at SVA. I remember when I applied to school and had my interview, the person, Bosley Latimer, he told me I was a diamond in the rough. But I came out of Newark and I was the greatest invention since the napkin. They told me that kind of just didn't feel so good, but I did go there. And I majored in media arts, which is graphic design and advertising, because nobody's believed you can make a living as a fine artist until you die. So I did the media arts, and through that I met Gil Stone, who was one of the greatest illustrators. He worked for Playboy magazine a lot, but he had a young disciple named Charles Willie, who did the Malcolm X cover, and that was very inspiring for me. But Lily was one of the few few African-American artists at the school. The teacher that I benefited from most there was Rosalind Jeffries, who was professor of African art. Her husband is well known as a professor and proponent of black culture.
I'd like, since Willie goes back a few years in Newark, I'd like for him to spend a minute or two talking about the Newark that he knew growing up and some of the things that he did with fun, entertainment, amusement, some of the people he knew, just to recollect, because this is being taped. This will be shown by anyone who wants to see the disc, or hopefully 50 years from now, the 400th anniversary. It might be something that the scholars or the people in Newark at the time might want to pull out. They might want to know a little bit about what Newark was like in the 1970s.
Not the 60s and 50s?
If you can remember, go for it.
No, Newark was a very safe city back in the 50s and 60s before the riots. The most present example for me is that when I was 8 years old, in 1963, my mom let me go see James Brown at, I think it was the RKO or Paramount Theater downtown Newark, and I went by myself with my young friend Joseph Crawley. We walked from the projects down what was then High Street. We stayed for 2 shows, and it was cool, there was no problem. And even in high school, years later, I was able to walk everywhere with no problem. There were no gangs at no given time. I don't think there were any drugs. I mean, the person on the street was a wino, not a junkie. And winos don't hurt people. So it was very, very safe at the time. I remember attending a lot of music concerts at Rutgers on campus there. Just a lot of great memories. I remember the Abraham Lincoln statue in front of the courthouse, sitting on his lap as a little kid. That's a great memory. I remember going to Saturday classes first at the Newark Museum. Every Saturday going there. I remember going to classes at Newark School of Fine Industrial Arts and getting a glazed donut at Woolworths right after class for years. I go on. I actually have a good memory, so I can tell you one different year of my life. I remember working in the Ironbound at a gas station owned by my friend's dad, Robert Dixon's dad, and I worked in a hot dog truck. And for that reason, to this day, I don't eat hot dogs. There's just so many great things, you know. I remember, Committee for Unified Newark. I remember when Jesse Jackson came to town and we were down at some park, maybe Military Park or the other park across the street, and being stopped and frisked because I had a backpack. I remember getting arrested during the teacher strike. We were always walking out of school back in those days, protesting teacher strikes. I remember getting arrested for that. It was always great to see, like, to come out of Arts High, walk a couple blocks and see that this was come together and somebody's a big crowd of us. That was a great, powerful feeling. I remember stealing the keys to the PA system at Arts High and playing Led Zeppelin real loud. I remember getting suspended for lighting incense in the hallway and having it in my hair.
Just like normal kid stuff, right?
Yeah, I remember the Model Cities program, which allowed so-called gifted high school students to take courses at Rutgers University in theater arts. And that was great for me. I took playwriting and dance and acting there. So just so many good memories.
And you were involved in I believe, high school with a couple of Baracus plays, right?
Well, we persuaded the Arts High folks to let us have a theater department, a theater club, I should say. It's not a department then. And we did the play Jello by me and Baraka. And I played the part of Rochester. Yeah, and that little 13-year-old girl, she was in that play. That's how we got it.
Might have helped you with your decision to participate, right? Let's talk a little bit, Willie, about this period of 1980 to 1994, when you were living on Lum Lane in the Ironbound. Rent was $250 a month. Lum Lane is no longer there, right? And you told me that without that rent being that low, that you could not have afforded to be an artist. You had a studio that was above a sheet metal factory, where you used to get some, I don't know what you call them, clippings, leftovers, scraps, to work with. Talk about those 14 years, what they were like and how important they were in your development as an artist.
Right. It's funny, it's all, I guess because it's my life, it all connects. But I moved into that loft, and I had my first job after college, paying job, was at the University of Delaware in the theater department. They had a children's theater company called the Stepping Stone Theater Arts Company. It was funded through the CETA program, so it only lasted 1 year. After that 1 year, we started doing soap operas in the malls in Delaware and Maryland area. And I didn't really like that so much, so I came back to Newark, and I found that loft. So to me, that loft was like my church. Because I had never lived in a place that had a ceiling higher than 8 feet. And I had never lived in 3,000 square feet before. And it was kind of on the edge of town. There were no neighbors around. So it was totally my world. It was next to a railroad track, and I always loved railroads and trains. I mentioned Delaware because I first discovered the idea of a loft when I was in Delaware. When I would come back to Newark to visit my mom, I would catch the train at the Delaware station, and across the street from me there were abandoned buildings, and I would go in those buildings. I was curious. So I found this building in Newark, and the first couple years there I had a job as a computer graphics artist, which is a whole other story. I got fired from that job through very racist actions, and I tried to get a job as a games designer at Sesame Street theme park. And I didn't get that job, so I said, okay, well, I'm just going to be an artist. And I started out doing art freelance graphic design, which was kind of frustrating because people don't know what they want until you give them what they ask for. So I said, well, if I got to struggle with that, I might as well just do my own thing and be an artist. And $250 a month allowed me to do portraits on the streets of New York on the weekends. I kept the graphic design business going, but I didn't do the work myself. I gave the assignments to other artists at market price, 10, 20%. They got what they wanted, I got a little extra, so that was fine. I had a friend from BU who was a DJ, who was from East Orange, so I let him rent space on the weekends and give big parties. So, yeah, I couldn't, my life would have been different if I had to pay even $500 a month rent. But also, through that experience, it was like graduate school for me because I got to know so many other artists. Some I knew for part time, and some who were just of my generation in the city of Newark. So eventually, with the assistance of Lisa Washington, we turned that space into a gallery. So I used half as a gallery and half was where I lived. And through the gallery, I was able to show a lot of artists, some very well-known artists. Like I showed Minnie Andrews, who became a good friend of mine. But I should show James Andrew Brown, who's a professor at William Patterson College. And Don Miller, who's no longer here, was a major illustrator. And through all of them, to me, that was graduate school. Because my major was not fine art, it was graphic design. So I'm seeing what they do. Everybody said, what's an installation? Oh, that's an installation. Okay, yeah. Paintings on 18 by 24, they can be bigger. Okay, start painting bigger. So it was a tremendous experience, a life-changing experience. I was able to share space with other artists like I enjoyed in school, rented space out to some, gave space to others. It was just like a total dream. I had 7, 8 skylights. My son and I would play handball on the back wall. We'd ride our bikes around inside. Just a great experience.
There was a zipper factory down there that was important to you as well, correct?
Yeah, that was our supply store. I don't think Ujima's not here, but another artist who lived in Ironbound at the time, he and I would go there to shop for materials. It came about because I took a jewelry making class at the Newark Museum. And even in high school I made jewelry sometimes out of forks and spoons and restaurant things. So I'm still doing that. And I'm walking down the street looking for little rusty things to make necklaces for myself. I follow the trail up these steps in this factory. I walk inside there, and there's a mountain of hair dryers. I mean, like tall, blue, dirty hair dryers. I mean, like an 8-foot tall bottom. And those hair dryers, I've made a lot of work out of those computers and sold a lot of that work too. So that became the store. They made appliances, and I started making art out of broken appliance parts.
And things you found in the street as well, between that factory and Penn Station.
Right. I don't know, there's no sanitation department representatives here, I guess. But Railroad Avenue was not cleaned very well. So I could always find things to make art of. So much so that in 1989 at Student Museum in Harlem, when I had to find myself, I told them I was an archaeological ethnographic Dadaist.
Could you say that again a little slower?
I told them that I was an archaeological ethnographic Dadaist. Because I was going to these sites in Newark, finding things representing the people and the culture, and then I was doing the Marcel Duchamp with them. And before that, though, I was a high-tech primitive artist. That's when I was doing the metal weavings and stuff. Me and this gentleman here would go to construction sites and get all kinds of stuff. Some legally, some illegally.
So Nell, while Willie's having all this fun in Newark, you're in Princeton. Tell us a little bit about your experience there, and then maybe a little later we'll contrast it with your experience here in Newark now that you're one of us.
Goodness. Now when I go back to Princeton, I feel like I've gone to the theme park. It's so different from Newark. And one big difference, Glenn and I really love Newark. And one thing that Newark gave us that we didn't have in Princeton was a state. Because Princeton is in the world, and Newark is in New Jersey. We always read the local newspapers when we were in Princeton, which was the Trenton Times. And Trenton is a very small town, whereas the Star Ledger, your Star Ledger, is wonderful, even in its diminished state, it's a more rooted newspaper in the world and in the state than we had done before. So Newark has given us this fascinating state. I'm a terrible New Jersey chauvinist. I really love New Jersey. And right now I'm writing a memoir called Old in Art School, because that's what it was like. And part of it is a hymn to New Jersey, as opposed to Rhode Island. So in Princeton, the people you deal with are usually pretty nice, in the sense that people who deal with rich people are nice to them. Here in Newark and in the rest of New Jersey, where the population is more heterogeneous and not always rich, you don't always get niceness. So it was very easy to move in and out and do the things that needed to be done because people were so nice. However, no, let me not do the however yet. Princeton is a wonderful intellectual community. My history department was still is a fantastic history department, and I did a lot of work there that I'm proud of. So it was a good experience. However, I got tired of being only Negro at Sculptor. And I mean, I had African American colleagues, but there weren't enough of us to reliably make a dent in the feel of the community. So here in Newark, I mean, look at this audience, the heterogeneous audience. We don't have enough Latin people here, but we have black and white people. And so you can talk to your neighbor, whether your neighbor is the same race ethnicity as you or not, and know that your neighbor is going to pay attention to you, because in Newark, the person who can do something for you in that very selfish way can look like me, or can look like you, or can look like anybody else. So there's not that assumption that somebody in my body is nobody. In Princeton, people don't know how to deal with other people. So my students, more than me, I mean, I was a known person there, but my students, and Cornell West, Cornell was stopped many times by the police. And my students would be, harassed is too strong a word for it, but can we help you? You know, that sort of thing. The sort of, now they call it microaggressions. So, you know, I just got really tired of being only one person. You know, people didn't know how to deal with other people, and so they didn't know that they were asking the same stupid question as 99 other people. So what really did it, though, was in the 90s, in 96, 97, Glenn and I spent a year in Paris, and we said, oh boy, this is terrific. We need to move to the city. What's the city? Newark. We didn't know how to do it, so we didn't do it. And then in 2001, we spent half a year in Berlin, and we said, oh, goody, goody, this is fantastic. Let's move to the city. And at that point, the sainted Clement Price took us by the hand, almost literally, put us in his car, drove us around, showed us Newark, drove us through Greenwich Park, drove us through Forest Hill, and said, this is your neighborhood. And we said, okay.
Let me ask you this. The people at Princeton University, and particularly in the history department, do they appreciate, or are they even aware of the connection between the university and Newark?
No.
They don't know that Princeton University started here in Newark.
They don't know that Princeton, New Jersey that Princeton is in New Jersey. Princeton is in the world. Or if you want to make it smaller, New York City.
Okay. Well, we'd like to have someone come up sometime. We'd be more than happy to take them around and show them what we have, and maybe the connection could be made a little stronger. So you talked about living in Paris and Berlin, and having both of those experiences convince you that you wanted to live in, you and your husband, that you wanted to live in the city, and it turned out in New York. And thanks. Can you tell us a little bit more about Clement, because he was such a wonderful human being and such a larger-than-life figure here in Newark, and someone that, you know, all of us miss every day and will miss every day for as long as we're alive, for the contribution that he made not only to the community, but in projecting a positive image of Newark outside of the community. Just talk a little bit. I know, you know, one of Nell's signature pieces is features Clement. Can you just talk a little bit more about his influence and how important he was to you, and how you viewed him, both as a friend and as a fellow historian?
A friend and a fellow historian and a great Newarker. And all of those were connected. I think we could talk about Clement Price for a long time, but for me, what was particularly admirable about him was his combination of the intellectual gravitas and the enthusiasm for the city. So you could be a cheerleader for the city without having that intellectual standing, that poise, that comfort with talking at an intellectual level that you could speak to anybody and speak to the New York Times or the Star Ledger or to people in the city. So he was a historian, and he always couched what he had to say about the city within a historical context, which I particularly appreciated. But there was also the warmth and the positive approach to the city that was not Pollyanna-ish, but saw the fine points. When we came here, we moved in 2002. So when he drove us around the city, he wasn't just showing us Forest Hill. He showed us downtown, and he showed us the Old Father Divine Hotel, and gave us a sense of some of the history that was here. And some of the history is not glorious, and some of it is surprising, and some of it is wonderful. So for instance, 2 blocks from where we live, we don't live on Mount Prospect, but on Mount Prospect there is a very handsome house which somebody has renovated, and it was god-awful taste. One of the donors of the Princeton University Library was here. So, there was all this going on with him, plus his incredible generosity. Sometimes people talk about, he had this wonderful smile. But I think it's so much more than that, because it was a warmth that did not seem forced and did not seem unrealistic. So we miss him a lot. My piece, Jeremy said that the Newark Arts Council was going to have a gala. That's something we discovered in Newark too. Galas. Yeah. So I made this piece for Jeremy because that gala was called If Not for Clem. And it's in the style of Andy Warhol because I wanted to capture Clement's celebrity as well as his beauty. So the piece it's got its following. I think it's going to the Newark Museum. It's definitely going to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. And right now it's at WGO. The pieces that I do as multiples I do in editions of 5. So 3 of those are spoken up for, and then there are 2 more. So that's the big piece. It's 48 inches tall and 36 inches wide. There are also 6 very small pieces that are 5 by 5 inches. And I put them together, 6 of them together as an installation, and that's also at WGO. So Clement Price is someone who we will never replace and we will never forget.
Willie, excuse me, I want to talk a little bit about your career. Correct me if I'm wrong here, you had your first solo gallery show in 1984? Yes, okay, but you had an artist in residence position in Harlem in 1989 that was very key in your life. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that and why the importance of that still carries over till today?
Yes. Well, a lot of artists in Newark today, there are a lot of artists in Newark back in the 80s. There weren't as many curators in Newark at the time, or people claimed to be curators. And I could never get anybody from New York to come to my studio in Newark, because New Yorkers think that they are everything. There's so many artists there, they say, we don't need you, so we're not going to come to your studio. I had a friend, Christine Vogel, who ran Newark Media Works. And she did all of my photography and slides for me, so I had like stacks of slides of my work. This is before digital era. And I would send them to all the galleries in New York, and I would get them all back. So it's kind of discouraging. But when I got the residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem, I shared the studio with 2 other artists, John Roselle and Renee Green, Renee Green lived in Hoboken, which is New Jersey, but Renee Green was the most gregarious person you could ever know. She knew everybody. She went to all the events, and her husband was a writer for Rolling Stone. So people would come to the studio to see her, but we shared the studio, so they saw me too. So through that experience, Fred Wilson, who was a curator then at the Longwood Art Studio in the Bronx, and on the board of Artist Space, he came to see Renee. They were good friends, and he saw my work and offered me to be in a group show at Artist Space, which was a major nonprofit gallery in New York and Soho at the time, but also a one-person show at the Longwood Art Center. So those connections really changed my life. When I had my show at the museum in '89, my show sold out. And not only did my show sell out, but my head blew up. So from that point on, there was no turning back. You know, I was convinced that I was on the road. Now, all these years later, I'm still on the road, but I've taken a lot of steps that I feel good about.
Give us some idea of where your works are collected.
Well, I'm in most of the major public museums in the U.S. I had a show at the Met a couple years ago. I had a one-person show at MoMA. I've had one-person show at the Whitney and the Guggenheim, every university museum in the U.S. pretty much. I showed the Museum of Man in Paris. I had a dealer in Paris for many years. There's a museum it's called the Lorraine Museum. They have another name for it in French, but I'm in that museum as well. I'm in the Stedelijk Museum in Rotterdam. I have a major collector who lives in Rotterdam. And I just got big collectors everywhere, you know, like Peter Norton, Peter Software Norton, I call him, is one of my biggest U.S. collectors. He lives in L.A. and New York. I just had the thought, but I'm not going to share about it. But everywhere, everything that I think is important in the art world, I've been reaching for and grabbing a lot of it. And I still have quite a journey ahead of me. It's funny, when I feel that I was able to get the attention of commercial galleries, it was because Jean-Michel Basquiat had died. Up until that time, the only African-American artist you saw in those major Soho galleries was Robert Colescott. So I would say that Basquiat died for our careers. Actually, I'd say that Jesus Christ died for our sins, Bob Marley died for our hair, and Jean-Michel Basquiat died for our careers. So after Basquiat died, every dealer in Soho was looking for one black artist. And to this day, they all have one, except for Jack Shaman. He has so many that the artist calls him Black Shaman.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
What's left?
What's left?
Yeah.
Oh, the Genius Award. Big auction sales. You know, the secondary market. That's when you're really secure. I mean, I could go on like I am now for the rest of my life, so I feel comfortable with that. But the fact that I live in this country, which is supposed to be paved with gold and all that stuff, I want the big picture, you know. And even though I'm no longer a kid, you know, I'm 40 over 61. 61 being my chronological age, and 40 being an age I decided to call my real age. So I can still have the energy and interest to move forward, to achieve a lot in my life. You know? So,
Could you know, when you go online, you read about Willie Cole, there are numerous descriptions of your work, and maybe your work defies description, I don't know. But I've seen assemblage artists, conceptual artists. Could you give us some idea of how you see yourself as an artist? And could you also tell us a little bit about the process of putting these items together? Because it's unbelievable what you do.
well, you know, I use the term conceptual engineer. When I was at SVA, I read a book by a writer named Wilson Keyes called Subliminal Seduction. After that, he wrote a book called The Age of Manipulation. And in that book, he uses the term conceptual engineer to describe what advertisers do to get the public to buy their goods and their wares. So I feel I'm a conceptual engineer. I'm creating new ways of seeing everyday things. So that's the term that I use. Writers use different things based on their education and their awareness. They like to make you fit into their script.
Take us through a piece. What is it that you do? If you're going to do let's say you're going to do a work with irons. After collecting them and having a vision in your mind as to what you're going to do with them, what is the process? I mean, from a manual standpoint.
So remember, I started doing irons in 1988, going into 89 studios in Harlem. Before that, I was weaving the middle jackets. So at studios in Harlem, I called myself an archaeological ethnographic dadaist. And I thought about how you could go to a big field and dig up a bunch of bones and then put them together into a whole world of a certain kind of dinosaur. But it may not be. So I decided I would just take a bunch of irons apart and just whiz some of them into something else. And so my interest was to visually define African American, to make something that's both African and American at the same time. So my work with the iron was always inspired by African art. We started out by making sculptures that looked like African carvings, inspired by my friend Lawrence Ramsey, who I wish was here, because he was a dealer of African art. And he and I spoke every night. We were the only people all night long, so we had a lot of conversations. But after making the figures and being in this community, going to African dance and records and learning about the European traditions from other artists, I recognized that I'm making so-called power figures, but there's no evidence of their power. So I said, what is the evidence of power of a piece made out of an iron? And I said, it's the scorch. Right. So then I started scorching. So that's how the scorch and the iron came together. But then the scorch looked so much like African textiles that the iron started to become everything African. When I found the first iron, I actually made a physical list of everything it reminded me of. So the handles were black, that was the word black. And the word black means a lot of different things, so for me it meant all those things. The bobby of the iron was silver. Silver and gold, a very precious material, even though it was just a color. The shape was like a boat. Who used the iron? Domestic servants, domestic workers, housewives. What did all that mean? So all of those things became a narrative about, I call it the cult of the domestic, but it's basically what Malcolm might have called the house Negroes. So then I began to contrast that with the field Negroes by making work out of lawn jockeys, but trying to make them look aggressive and revolutionary. So, and what something in my mic wasn't working, this is good.
And when did women's shoes come into play in your life as something you wanted to work with?
Right. Well, see, today I can dabble in the archaeological ethnographic dadaism or the high-tech primitive art, but I'm a perceptual engineer. And a perceptual engineer has to do with the awareness that everything is made out of one thing. Like I'm sitting here with a room full of people in chairs. Sure, you all look different, you got your own style, your own textures, your own colors, but actually everything is exactly the same. This is a room full of vibrating particles. So with the perceptual engineering, it's about taking one thing and multiplying it against itself to give it a whole new appearance. So people think the art is about the shoes, but it's really about me convincing myself that I can make anything out of one thing. And it started with the irons, but I didn't have the concept of the irons. The concept came, my son had a lot of secrets that he gave me to make a show for the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And I didn't have enough to make my concept. I went to the thrift store, and in the thrift store, I saw beautiful high-heel shoes. So I just switched to shoes. And that's how it started. I would say in 2005, shoes really went crazy for me because I was a fellow at the University of Georgia, and I didn't take any materials with me there. Instead, I went to the local thrift store there and told them that I'm doing a project with my students, and I want to buy every high-heel shoe you have. And I offered them 50 cents a pound. And I told them this in September, and in January, they gave me like $1 million and shoes, and the university paid for it. So when I came back to Jersey the following year, I did the same thing at the Salvation Army in Patterson, New Jersey. So, just shoes just became a beautiful cell, or a beautiful molecule.
Now, the other day, you said this to me. I love making art, but it's not fun. It's too intense. Could you explain the personal relationship you have, not just with your art, but with the process? And I'd like Willie to comment after that on whether or not art for him is fun, or is it something else?
This really does. Yeah, this is working, isn't it?
Not compared to this. This is the DJ's mic.
When I would talk to my friends from my former life, they would say, "Oh, it's so wonderful to be doing art. It must be so much fun." And I said, "No, it's not fun. It's very intense. I feel very contented. I work for hours without feeling hungry or tired. It's engrossing. But when I think of fun, I think of roller coasters and big giggles and things like that. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't feel like that. So that's the first answer. When I started at Mason Gross, I was drawing and painting by hand, nothing digital, and I love the trace of the hand. I love the texture. I loved what oil paints did and how they looked. When I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, they were insistent on environmental issues. And I had wanted to switch to acrylics anyhow, so I switched to acrylics. And within the studios, there was kind of a music sharing program. So I would listen to German radio when I was working, but I could also listen to the music that the other students were listening to. And I discovered this fantastic group that I had never heard of before. The Black Eyed Peas. And what the Black Eyed Peas did for me with acrylic paint and then discovering digital was moving away from, I guess, what you would call the analog, or the hand, or the traces of the hand. My eye moved much more into what is digital, what is obviously manipulated after the trace. And so what I have been doing in the last few months is digital collages. So I work back and forth, and I have been working this way since 2010, back and forth between the manual and the digital. So I will draw or paint an image, and then trace it or photograph it so that it becomes digital, and then manipulate it and put color in, unnatural color, recompose it, give it a different scale or even a different kind of perspective so that it becomes a very digital image. And then I can paint that, which gives it the hand again, and then digitize that and go back and forth and back and forth. If any of you would like to come to the Dietz Building Open Studios on the 7th, I put a few flyers in the back. And I have a couple of big pieces in my studio. One thing I learned from Willie Cole was to invite people into your studio and use your studio as a kind of gallery. So I have a couple of pieces there that show that back and forth process. In WBGO, they're much more digital. And 7 of the pieces are from my book, Art History, Volume 27, that were in Activate Market Street. So they're big because they were in the storefront. And they are on shiny paper. They are unnatural colors. They are frankly digital. And then there's 2 series from the 2 Motherwell series, which began with my own drawings inspired by paintings by the painter Robert Motherwell, who wrote as well as painting, and then are very digital as well.
Willie, is making art too intense to be fun for you?
When I was a graphic designer, I was a big patron of this library because I have a picture file. So everything that I would draw or paint, I would come here and research first and get a lot of photos and doing that. And I hated that process. That's probably why I started doing sculpture. Sculpture to me now is play. I don't start with an idea. I start with time on my hands. So I just submit. I just go in the studio and I'm surrounded by bottles, shoes, irons, bicycles, whatever. And I just play. Just play for 4 hours at a time. Then I may take a break and go outside or watch Dr. Oz. I do that every day at 2 o'clock nowadays. And then I go back to work. And then I break again at dinner time. Sometimes after dinner I kind of fall asleep in the chair for a half hour, then I go back again. And it's more like a lifestyle. It's not labor to me. My whole life is fun to me, so I don't have a measure to say it's not fun. I'm not doing anything I don't enjoy ever.
How long will it take for you to complete a piece to your satisfaction, or are you still always looking at them thinking, well, I can do this or that?
I work on a lot of things at one time. In the 90s, I would take 1 day a week to try to do at least one piece in one session. But in the past, I would say the past 10 years, I work on several things at once. I have my studios divided by materials. So I have one room that's just all shoes, another room that's a wood shop, and I have another larger room that's just a combination of things, but that room is divided into 3 sections also. One is like for drawing and painting, one is for special projects. So everything's happening at once. And a lot of my day is just walking through. Pause, put a shoe on there, go someplace else. And I don't labor over it, because that slows down the process. Thinking is a good thing, but you don't have to think. Sometimes it's about having faith. So I just work from the faith point now.
Is music part of the process for you as it is for Nell?
It has been. I mean, we're talking about 61 years, so it has been. There was a time when I was making music on my own. I would play that while I was working, and then at times I would play like classical guitar music because I was studying classical guitar. But now I'm really big into ambient music because it doesn't demand anything of me. So I listen to that on Pandora a lot. But also because of where I live, it's so quiet that I also enjoy no music at all.
So you could finish a piece in a week or a few months, or what's the range?
Well, I just finished a piece in Atlantic City. It's a 15-foot tall bird made out of 5,000 plastic water bottles. And I started it in the middle of April. I went down there for 2 days a week. And I didn't want to drive in traffic, so I would get there like at around 1 o'clock and work until 6. So you can do the math on that, how many hours that was. But some things happen in a day or two. I did a show in Cuba last year, and I wanted to, because they didn't have money for shipping, and the curator wanted to take the work on a plane. So I made 3 pieces of that show in like 3 hours. Because they were small pieces.
Right.
And that's the challenge, is because I had done the multiplication of a single object. The challenge I assigned myself was, now, can I do that with just 1 shoe? Or just 2 shoes? So it became like shoe origami. It didn't take long at all. I mean, you can't measure art production by the regular clock. Every piece we make has taken our whole life up to that point.
Now, what about the process for you?
I tend to work in multiples, whether I'm obviously printmaking or doing several drawings or paintings on the same theme or with the same inspiration. So in January, we went to Provincetown to eat oysters, and I took drawing materials, and in 2 or 3 days I made several drawings. 2 of them are the inspiration for the pieces that are at WBGO, but also one set are in a group show now at the Montclair studio. So, but the question for me is, where does it end? So, is the end of the piece drawn or painted by hand, or is the end the next digitized version, or is the end when it goes back to the hand, or is it the end when it goes back and forth and back and forth? So there are pauses, definitely, and that can be just after a few days. And since when I'm really working on things that are obviously printed, like the little book in the back, well, then when the addition is done, those are not addition, but the bigger plates from those are addition. So when the addition is gone, that's the end.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question. We're going to open the floor for questions. We have some time for that. And I'll end by asking this question. It's one of the contrasts between these people that I find most intriguing. And that is, Willie talked a little bit about it, but he's an artist who has also written plays. He'd like to have those plays produced. So he has this kind of yearning to be a writer, but he's an artist. And here we have Nell, who is a very accomplished writer, who is still studying art, working art. So it's almost like they come from different backgrounds, but kind of want what the other person, or want success in the other person's field. What I'd like to ask him is, what art provides Willie for his writing? And I'd like to ask Nell what writing provides her for her art.
That's a well-crafted question.
A little long, but
What art provides for my writing? Well, because I was a graphic designer and also an illustrator in the 70s, pictures and words go together well. One of my first success as a professional was to have a children's story published in 1977 or 8 in every junior magazine, where I did the illustrations and wrote the story. So I've been wanting to do that ever since then. And now a lot of my work, before you see it, is just words. Like my sketchbook is not a book of drawings, it's a book of sentences and thoughts. And I remember when I had my first big show in New York, when I started selling the work, they wanted me to make more work out of irons. Up until that time, including that loft, we were everything. We were a band, we were writers, we were actors, we were everything. So I missed all that. So I started to make art using words. So right now, my art, if I can remember your exact wording of it, but my visual art has a component that is all words. It's acronyms, like the word America. Adam makes Eve regret ingesting contaminated apples. It's America. All my eagles remain in the combat area. Just God, G-O-G. Gift of divinity. I haven't done that. So I do that with words just to exercise that. But I study screenwriting, and screenwriting is really describing pictures. I know the movies have dialogue, but the pictures tell the story. And in my classes, they tell us to start with 12 sentences that are very visual. So I'm making pictures with words. In Spanish, there's 12 sentences in 10 pages. So you have 120 pages, because one page of screen time is one page of script is 1 minute of screen time. So 120 pages. So it's really describing pictures.
Nell, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, this mic is working. I think I told you that when I was at Yale, they asked me how art had changed how I thought about history, and I couldn't answer. Talking about history is still my day job. That's how I pay for art, because I'm not a big international art star like Willie. I'm just a baby artist. What I discovered was that the visual focused me on the particular. So as historians, we would ask the question, how is, say, a biography or an event representative of a larger whole? And this was particularly true in African American history, where we always want a black individual to stand for black people generally. And I've run into difficulty with this when I say, well, I am now interested in individual particularity. And that gets heard as, oh, that's not black, that's white. It's white people who are individuals, or who want to be individuals, or who see themselves as individuals. We black people think of ourselves as a community. But I found, working on Art History Volume 27 in particular, that simply making an image of Alain Locke talking about the ancestral arts turned me to the actual artist and their actual response and their actual images and their actual paintings in a way that, well, I had not worked on that topic as an artist, as a historian, but I think now I'm much more interested in what an image or even what words themselves have to say or have to show.